It's now Tuesday morning, March 31, AD 33. The disciples point to that withered fig tree that Jesus had cursed the day before. And as they approach Jerusalem, the events from the day before could not have been far from their minds. So as Jesus enters the Temple Mount, crowds gather to hear him. And here's what we read. And all the people came early in the morning to hear him on that day. Where did they go? They went to the temple. Luke 21:38. And here's what happens. The chief priests, the scribes, the elders, they waste no time. They're ready to make their move. And so on this Tuesday, they try and lay 4 traps to ensnare what they believe is their adversary. Trap number 1, they pose, whose authority, Jesus? Mark 11:28. They ask, by whose authority? They demanded to know, had Jesus carried out his actions the day before? Jesus doesn't take the bait. Instead, he turns the table on them for just a minute. He has a question of his own. And here's what he asks to those. He says, was the baptism of John the baptizer, John the prophet, from heaven or from man? Mark 11:30. Now, if they respond from heaven, the next question is obvious. Then why don't you believe the one about whom John testified, the Messiah, Jesus? If they reply, well, John was from man, they risk alienating the crowds, because the crowds in Jerusalem hold John in high esteem as a prophet, a pure prophet. And here's what Jesus does. He then offers 3 parables. One about 2 sons, one about murderous tenants, and finally one about guests at a wedding feast. But they all drive home the same point, that they, the religious leaders, are rejecting grace and truth in the service of hypocritical self-righteousness. Then they come to direct, trap number 2. Whose allegiance? The leaders try a new tactic. They send in the Pharisees, a Jewish sect known for their zeal for the law. They send in the Herodians, those loyal to Herod's dynasty. And they ask the question of Jesus. Matthew 22, hey, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? If Jesus says yes, he shatters people's expectations of him as the Messiah, who's going to overthrow the despised Roman rule. But if he says no, he can be arrested for fomenting, revolt. But Jesus definitely evades the either-or dilemma. You see, the denarius had Caesar's image on it. And as long as Caesar's in power, it's appropriate to pay taxes to Caesar. And we are also to give to God the things that are God. Since we're also made in the image of God, we owe everything, all that we have and all that we are, to him. So pay your taxes, Jesus says, and worship God. There's a 3rd trap. And they say, here it is, whose wife in the resurrection? After Jesus had silenced the Pharisees and the Herodians and then the Sadducees, there's another sect, and they deny the end-time resurrection of the day. And they were openly ridiculed Jesus' belief in the resurrection by asking a trick question about marriage in heaven. So here it goes in Matthew 22, verses 23 to 33. Read it this afternoon. Jesus tells them, don't you understand the Bible? There's no marriage in heaven, or the power of God. Okay? The power of God, God's self-affirmation. You see in Exodus 3:6, 15 and 16, it shows in heaven God is the God of the living, not the dead. So like the others, their smirks turn to marvel as they grow silent. But there's one more trap on that day. Which command, they asked Jesus. Now the Pharisees are sent back in because they're an expertise in this matter. So they say, Jesus, of all God's command, which is the greatest? And so Matthew 22, once again, verses 34 to 40, Jesus summarizes his answer in a word. Love God and love for your neighbor. Now what Jesus does, he initiates some questions to the very people who've been trying to trap him. So he asks them a question also. And here's what he says. He says, let me ask you a question about Psalm 110, verse 1. How the Messiah can be David's Lord. And of course, no one was able to answer him. No one was able to say a word. nor from that day on would anyone dare ask him any more questions. Matthew 22, verse 46. Then Jesus launches this scathing critique of the Pharisees, and he pronounces 7 different woes of judgment upon them. In many things, he called them hypocrites and then blind guides of the people of Israel. I mean, this is full-scale verbal assault, removing any doubt concerning Jesus' intentions, his agenda, his aim. Jesus has no desire to ally himself with the current leadership. He has overcome to overthrow their authority. Either Jesus will assume power or he must die. This is the real historical Jesus, fully in control as he responds full on with grace and in truth to all the traps on all sides. He knows what he's doing. He knows what is coming. Every word, every step is for the fame of his Father's name and the salvation of those willing to receive him. I'll see you next time. Is the Good Friday service on Friday at 7 p.m. on your calendar? There's no more important place to be than in Cypress Point on Friday night.